Hello everyone, you're welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Nancy, and if this is your first time seeing my channel, kindly hit on the subscribe button and also put on your notification bell so you'll be the first to be notified when I upload new tutorials. In today's class, I'm going to be sharing with you guys how to make this dress with an underbust corset and a bags. If this is something you're interested in learning, keep watching and let's get started. So guys, to make this dress, you'll be needing about 2.5 yards of the African print fabric, then 1 yard of a crepe fabric which would be used for the upper part of this dress, and half yard of a lace fabric which would be used for the sleeve area. Now to draft out our pattern, I have my pattern paper folded into two. I'm going to start by drawing a straight line across the top of this pattern paper here. This line is the shoulder line and it can also be referred to as the starting line. From this starting line, I'm going to come down to my bust point. My shoulder to bust point for me, I'm going to mark it here. Still leaving the tape at the starting line, I'm going to measure my shoulder to under bust. Now the next measurement I'm going to take is my shoulder to waist in front. So because I'll be making a side dart here, I'm taking my shoulder to waist for the front and the back separately. My shoulder to waist measurement for the front is 15.5, while my shoulder to waist measurement for the back is 14. But if you don't know how to go about this, just use the shoulder to waist measurement you get for your front and then you subtract it by 1.5 to get the shoulder to waist for the back. So now I'm going to draw straight lines across all the points that I marked. So now I'm going to go ahead to label these lines. This is the shoulder line, this is the bust point line, this is the under bust line, and this is the waist line. And lastly, I'm going to measure my back's length. I want my back's length to be 6 inches. So I'm going to place the tape from the waistline all the way down to mark 6 inches. And I'll go ahead to reel a straight line across this point. So the back is that triangular shape that we have in the front of the dress. Now I'm going to label this line as my hip line because the hip measurement will be placed on this line. So now let's go ahead to add all our body measurements. And this side of the paper is the center fold of the pattern paper. Now from the shoulder line, I'm going to come in by 3 inches to mark my neck width. And for the neck depth, I'm going to go down from the shoulder line to mark 7 inches. And because I want it to be a V-neck line, I'm going to connect these 2 points with a straight line. So you can actually make your neck depth to be deeper than mine. It just depends on what you want. Again, from the center of the pattern paper on the shoulder line, I'm going to go in to mark half of my shoulder measurement, which is 7 inches, and I marked it here. Now from this 7 inches point, I came down by 1 inch and I connected it to the neck width. So this is for my shoulder slope. So now next thing I'm going to do is to get my armhole depth. And for your armhole depth, you are going to divide your bust measurements by 6 and you add 1.5 to whatever you get. So when I did that, I got 7.2 inches. So now I'm going to connect my shoulder slope to this new point, which is 7.2 inches for me. Now I'm going to draw a straight line across this point, and this new line will now become our chest line. And once you are through with this, get the midpoint of this armhole depth. So I'm going to fold my tape measure into 2 to mark the midpoint here. And then I'm going to go in from this point by half of an inch. Now back to the chest line, I'm going to divide my bust measurements into 4. So now I'm going to connect these 3 points together from the shoulder slope to the midpoint and to this new point I marked on the chest line. So make sure you're using your curve ruler to do this, and by the time you connect these 3 points together, this is going to give you your armhole curve. Now the next thing I'm going to do is that from the center of the bust point line, I'm going to go in by half of my nipple to nipple measurement. From the center of the under bust as well, I'm going to go in by half of my nipple to nipple measurement. From the center of the waist, I'll go in by half of my nipple to nipple measurement. And from the center of this hip line here where the back's length is, I'm going to go in by half of my nipple to nipple measurement. Now I'm going to connect these 4 points together with a straight line. So once you are through with that, the next thing you are going to do now is that on the waistline, make sure you are doing this on the waistline. On both sides, I'm going to mark half of an inch from this line here. So this is for your darts. Now I'm going to connect this point to meet the top of this line here. So now I'm going to connect the top of this line to the point on this side, and I'll connect the top of this line again to the point on this side. And then again, I'm going to connect this point to meet the end of this line, and this would give me my dart. So make sure you go ahead to do exactly the same thing you see me doing here. Now the next step is to divide the shoulder here into two equal half, and then you go ahead to mark the midpoint. Now we are going to connect this midpoint with a straight line to meet the bust point, and this is for the shoulder dart. So next I'm going to go ahead to add my body measurement. Now on the bust line, I'm going to mark my bust measurement divided by 4, which I've already marked here. On the bust point line, I'm also going to mark my bust measurement divided by 4. Now on the under bust line, you don't have to mark any measurement there. You just keep it to go to the waistline. So on the waistline, I would mark my waist measurement divided by 4. And for the dart intake here, I'm going to measure the distance between the 2 points. So this is 1 inch. Now I'm going to replace my dart here after my actual waist measurement. Now on the hip line, I'm going to place my hip measurement divided by 4. So now I'm going to go ahead to join all these points I marked outside, from the chest line to the bust point line and to the waistline. Now I'm going to connect the waistline to meet the hip line as well. So now the next thing we are going to do is to tighten up the under bust area so I can get a bustier for the cup part. So this bustier we are going to do now is very important because it prevents your cup from being flat. So on the under bust, I'm going to be doing a tightening of 1.5 inch. So I'm going to divide 1.5 inch into two, and whatever I get, I'm going to place it on both sides of this dart on the under bust line. So I'm going to place half of the 1.5 inches here and place the remaining half on this other side. And from these points I marked, I'm going to extend it down to meet the last line. So from the under bust here, I'm going to extend these points I got down to meet the last line after I divided 1.5 into 2. And once I'm done with this, I'm going to connect curves to meet the top of my bust point on this side. So now the next thing we are going to do is to get my side dart. So to get the side dart, you'd measure from your shoulder to waist measurement in front minus your shoulder to waist measurement at the back. So for me, it's 15.5 minus 14, and that is 1.5. Now I'm going to place my tape from the bust point line on this side to mark 1.5. And from the bust point, I'm going to connect it to meet this new point I marked for the side dart, and I would also make sure that I'm extending this line out of my pattern. So once I'm through with this, I'm going to go ahead to mark the area where my side dart is. So this is where I'm going to be cutting off. So I'll be cutting through the bust point line. So while cutting, make sure you're not cutting everything totally. Make sure you stop cutting when you get to 1/4 inch away from the bust point. Now on the shoulder as well, I'm going to be cutting all the way to the bust point, and like I said earlier, do not cut it entirely. Stop 1/4 inch away from the bust point. So once you are through with that, you are going to go ahead to cover up the darts at the side, just like you see me doing. So once you have covered it properly, make sure you use a sellotape to hold it down so that it doesn't move or shift. Now you would also notice that the measurement on the chest line and the bust point line isn't equal anymore. All you have to do is to go ahead to just blend it, just like you see me doing now. So you can see that I've blended this side and it's now equal. So once you are through with that, the next thing we are going to do is to create the curves for the cup. So this is our neck depth, but what you are going to do first is that you are going to mark 3 inches above the under bust. Make sure you are marking 3 inches above your under bust. And then I would connect this new point to meet the under bust on this side. So make sure you are using your curved ruler to do this. And then from the side here, I'm going to connect from the under bust to meet this line on the side. So once you are through with this, the next thing we are going to do now is to replace our dart and add our body measurements. Now on the chest line, I'm going to measure the dart spacing I have here. This is 1/4 inch. I'm going to replace it on the side here to add 1/4 inch, and then I'll extend the armhole depth to meet this new point. So now on the waistline, I'm going to mark my waist circumference divided by 4. One thing you should note is that I'm not going to be using this inner dart I made with the pencil anymore. I'll be using what I have for the marker. So this is 2¼ of an inch, and then I'll just place it here to replace my dart. On the hip line, I'm going to place my hip circumference divided by 4, and then I'll take the new dart measurement, which is 2¼ of an inch, to replace it here as well. Now I'll go ahead to join these new points together on this side. So from the chest line to the waistline, and from the waistline to the hip line. So now on this side, I'm going to be extending this curved line to meet the side here. So once I'm through with this, I'm going to go ahead to tighten up the overbust a bit. Now from this side of the shoulder, I'm going to mark 1/4 of an inch on both sides, and then I'll connect this point to meet the bust point. So once you are done with this, the next thing we are going to work on is the backs. Remember that we've already measured the length of the backs in the beginning of this tutorial. So what we are going to do now is just to fold in the dart so it covers the dart spacing properly. So just go ahead to fold the dart properly like you see me doing here. So remember that I said from my waist to the length of my backs is 6 inches. So since we have this already, now from the center of this last line here, I'm going to connect it to meet the waist with a straight line. So just do exactly the same thing I'm doing. It's actually very simple to do this, but make sure you've closed the dart spacing before doing this so that each part would be equal after cutting. So now we have achieved the back shape for the waist area of this dress. And once you're through with this, you're basically done drafting out the front pattern. Now you're just going to open it up this way to cut out. So make sure you're paying attention to the areas I'm cutting so that you don't make any mistake.
Is it only me that you feel I'm sinking, trying desperately? Something changed here. You don't see it, but I can feel it everywhere. It's funny how things change in an instant.
Now for the waist area, I don't want it to have joining, so I'm just going to go ahead to tape it together so it isn't in two pieces anymore. So this is basically all for the front pattern. Now I'm going to go ahead to transfer these patterns to my fabric. Now for the center of the cup, I added 1/2 of an inch stitching allowance on the shoulder, the neckline, the bottom and the side. Now I'm just going to unpin this pattern, and I use this to cut the lining and the crepe. I went ahead to place an S-stay on the wrong side of both pieces. Now for the sides of the cup, I added 1/2 of an inch sewing allowance to the shoulder, the armhole and the bust side with the bottom, but on the side of the pattern I added 2 inches stitching allowance because it's needed just in case you want to adjust or do some amendments on your clothes. So I used the pattern to cut out the crepe and also the lining, and I used an SD on the wrong side. Now I'm just going to keep the lining pieces away for now, and then I would arrange the crepe properly. So this is how it should be arranged. The parts with the v-neck line should be at the center, and the other two parts with the armhole should be at the side. So now that I'm done arranging, I'm going to place them right side to right side facing each other, just like you see me doing, and then I would go ahead to pin starting from the bottom. So once you're done pinning one side, this is how it's going to look like in front. Now you go ahead to pin the other side as well. So make sure you're pinning from the bottom all the way up to the shoulder. Now once you're done pinning, you head over to your sewing machine to stitch them together by 1/2 of an inch, and then this is how your bustier would look after stitching. You should also give it a quick press and open the seam as well. So you can see how beautiful the bustier is. Now I'm going to go ahead to bring the waist pattern. Now I added 1/2 of an inch sewing allowance to the cup area and the bottom, but on the side I added 2 inches stitching allowance. So make sure you do exactly the same thing. Now I'm going to take out my pattern, and from what you can see here, I used my pattern to cut out the crepe and to also cut out the lining. I've kept the lining aside and I want to work on the crepe. So for the underbust corsets, I've already ironed my hairstay to the wrong side of this piece. The next thing I'm going to do is to draw the lines to which the boning is going to be inserted into. But the first thing I'll do is to draw the line from the center here, that's from this sharp edge at the top to meet the sharp edge at the end of the underbust corset. Now from this center line, I'm going to come out by 2 inches, and this is because I want the distance between each boning to be 2 inches. So I'll mark 2 inches here, and I'm going to further mark 2 inches after this point and mark 2 inches away from this point again. On this other side as well, from the center line, I would mark 2 inches here. I would mark out 2 inches here and mark 2 inches here. So altogether I have 7 lines, but for a plus size person, you are likely to have more than 7 lines because your waist is wider than mine. The reason I stopped marking the 2 inches distance was because it was already getting to the sides of my underbust corset. So just make sure you still have some allowances at the side in which you'd be using to join the back piece of your dress to the front piece. So guys, for the boning casing, I'm going to be making use of my Ankara fabric. And this is the boning I would be using. The width of this boning is 1/4 inch. So I usually like to use this tiny boning because I'm on a slim side. It gives it a different fitting compared to when a slim person uses a wider boning. So this is the casing for the boning, and I folded this piece into two, and the wideness of this piece here is 3/4 inch. Take note of that. Now I'm going to place this piece on the center line. Now there is something you need to know here. Make sure you're not placing this casing directly on this line. So it's best to place it away from the line. I'm not saying that you should place it too far. Just place it away, directly away from the line, and then you stitch. But I'll be taking this to the sewing machine to show you how to go about stitching this casing properly. So guys, you're going to be placing these rough edges of this casing very close to this line. Make sure you're not placing this casing directly on the line. So now I've placed the casing very close to this line, and then I'll go ahead to stitch it all the way from the up to meet the down part. So the reason why it's important not to stitch directly on the line is because after stitching and folding this casing, you'd find out that the casing would not be in the center anymore. It will not be on the middle of the line anymore. So you have to make sure that you're stitching away from the line. And as I'm stitching now, you can see that the lines is even showing by the side, and that's because I'm not stitching directly on the line. So this is exactly what you should do. After stitching, I'll go ahead to fold this casing in such a way that it covers the stitching that I've made here. So once you have folded the casing properly, the next step is to top stitch directly on these folded edges on this side. Now once this is done, this is how the casing for the boning is going to be. But one last thing that we are going to do here is to top stitch directly on this other side that we stitched initially, so that it gives it this unique and fine look. So once you are done top stitching the other side, this is how it should be. Now you can go ahead to trim out the excess casing at the top and at the bottom. So make sure to attach the boning casing to the other lines as well. So I went ahead to do the same thing on the other lines, and this is what I have. All the boning casing is ready. Now before joining the upper part to the under bust, make sure to notch the seam allowance on the bust area. So once you've notched the seam allowance on the bust area, you would flip the upper part to the right side of the fabric. Now we are going to be attaching the upper part to the underbust corset by 1/2 inch. So to do this properly, you are just going to place the center of the upper part directly on the center of the underbust corset. Then you go ahead to pin them together. Now that you've pinned the center together, you are going to pin one side directly on each other. So once you are done pinning one of the sides, you would head over to the sewing machine to stitch from the center here all the way to this end. And then once that is stitched, you go ahead to pin this other side together. So the reason why we are doing it this way is because of the V shape at the center. If you don't do it this way, it won't relax properly after it has been joined. After pinning the sides together, you would head over to the sewing machine to start stitching from the center here all the way to the end as well. So guys, after I was done, this is what I had. You can see how neat it is, and you can see how the bone casing is looking all nice and straight. So now I went ahead to stitch down the lining just exactly the same way I stitched the actual fabric. So the difference between the lining and the actual fabric is that the lining does not have any bone. Now I'm going to go ahead to pin the neckline together so that I would head over to the sewing machine to stitch my neckline by half of an inch, following the direction of my finger. So now I'm going to go ahead to stitch the sides together by half of an inch, and then I would also stitch the other side by half of an inch as well. So after turning the neckline and the sides, I went ahead to give it a quick press, and this is what I have. You can see how neat and beautiful this came out. Now I've gone ahead to make the back. It's just a regular straight back. So I just wanted to show you guys how to make the bustier in front and the backs with the boning included. So before joining the upper part to my skirt, I usually like to confirm if the front and the back of the upper part is equal. So this is how to just go about it. Fold the front into two and then place it on the back piece. From what I can see, the waistline is equal here. Now I have my zipper allowance on this side, and remember that the armhole for the front piece is deeper than the armhole for the back piece, so that is why it's this way. Once you have confirmed that, then you are good to go. So guys, I've actually made the front piece and the back piece of the skirt behind the camera, but you will also notice that the front piece of the skirt has a tape. This is because after I made the cutting, I realized that my camera did not capture that clip, so I had to tape it back for me to explain to you guys how to go about it. So let's just assume that there is no tape on it. So this is the front piece of my skirt, and another thing you should take note is that for the front piece of my skirt, I didn't include any waist dart, because if you go ahead to include a waist dart on the front piece of the skirt, you would end up seeing trimming out that area, so it's not needed. Now the next thing I did was to mark the center of my skirt. I've actually ironed it out, so from here I can see the line of the center of my skirt. Now I would place my tape from the waistline on that center to mark 6 inches. So the reason I'm marking 6 inches is because when we were drafting out the pattern, remember that I said that the back's length is from the waist to 6 inches. Now that I've marked the 6 inches on the center of my skirt, I'm going to connect it to the top of the waistline on this side with a straight line. And I'll also connect the center of this point to meet the top of the waistline on this side as well. So once you are done with this, have it in mind that you need to add half of an inch to the top of this line, which would be for the joining allowance to which it will be joined to the upper part. So do not cut directly on the white line. Add half of an inch for the joining allowance. And then you go ahead to do exactly the same thing I'm doing. So guys, before joining the upper part to the lower part, you need to insert the boning into the boning casing. So this is my boning, and I'm going to go ahead to place it on any of the casing from the beginning to the end, but I would make sure that I'm cutting it half of an inch away from the end. So before inserting the boning, make sure to melt the edges of the boning so that it doesn't tear out of the fabric. So once you are done melting the edges of the bone, make sure that the curved side of this bone is facing you before inserting it into the casing. And once you have inserted this, just go ahead to do the rest for the other casing. So I've inserted the boning into all the casing, and this is the reason why it is looking curved. All you have to do is head over to your ironing board to give the underbust corset a quick press. So once you've ironed the underbust corset properly, it will become flat and relaxed. Now the next step is to place the skirt, that's the center of the skirt, on the center of the upper part. This V shape should be placed on this sharp V, and then you go ahead to pin the centers together. Once you have pinned the centers together, you would adjust one side of the skirt here to fit in to the other part, and then you go ahead to pin this together. After pinning, you head over to the sewing machine to stitch the side together. Once you're done stitching this side, you go ahead to adjust the other side of the skirt to fit in to this other side of the upper part, and then you would pin together as well. After pinning, you head over to the sewing machine to stitch the sides together. So after I was done joining this upper part to the lower part, I'll go ahead to serge the edges on this side, and then this is how it's going to look like in front. So after joining, you can see how the triangular shape is looking really nice. The boning, everything is looking very fine, and the bustier. So I just wanted to show you guys how to go about this. What is left for you guys to do is just to attach the shoulders of both the front piece and back piece together, and the sides as well. You fix your zipper, and that will be all. And for the making of the sleeve, I'll be sharing a separate tutorial. Thank you for watching to the very end, and I hope this tutorial was helpful. Please subscribe and also put on your notification bell